Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you here at the California Placement Association's monthly webinar. Do want to thank Transfer. They are our CPA sponsor this year, one of them. There's more opportunities to be a CPA sponsor if you'd like to. Transfer is really cool. They use virtual reality to train for real life work experience for vocational. So you put on the VR goggles and they have programs if you want to learn how to do welding or do medical. They have all these programs. You work with a job coach them, and then it just makes it easier when our clients are ready to get out in the workplace. They really have that real life experience ready to go. So we want to thank Transfer for supporting California Placement Association. And with that, I want to introduce the reason we're all here today. It's Mr. Kramer, Eric Kramer. He's a gold medal winning author on active interviewing, branding, and selling yourself to win your next job. He has over 15 years of experience as a career coach, and I'm super excited to hear you speak today. I teach my clients about interviewing all the time, but I've never really heard of active interviewing, so I'm excited for that. So, and I know you have received or had access to an informational sheet he shared that we threw in a Google Drive for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kramer, and thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. And Greg, I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about active interviewing. This, the CPA is really a dream audience for me because it gives me the opportunity to talk to people that are involved in helping people land jobs, and certainly the interview being such a critical part of landing a job, and being able to speak with people that are helping candidates. And by my sharing the active interviewing concept, hopefully you'll be able to work with your candidates more effectively with the interviews. So thanks very much. The other thing I want to mention is that the information that I shared with Greg that he has uploaded for your access is a coaching manual. So I will get to that later on in the presentation. I'll show you where that coaching manual comes in and what the manual relates to. So what I like to do is start with a question. So the question is, you have a candidate that is going for an interview, and they say to you, what do I do to prepare for an interview? So what are some of the typical suggestions or strategies you have when you talk to your candidates? And you can put this in the chat, or you can, you can come off mute and say it. So I see, so Carmen says, research the company. So you really want to know the background of the company and as much as you can. Reference a job description, look at the job description, really analyze the job description, see what it's looking for. Practice answers to questions, right? So Anthony, so a lot of people are looking for, how do I answer these questions? Anna, you're talking about the salary. Certainly, salary questions can come up, and how do you manage that? How do you handle that kind of tense question? It's always kind of an interesting approach in what people do to answer and to not leave money on the table, which is the biggest concern. Job description, one-to-one session with coordinator, review job description and tips. Okay, so these are all really good suggestions. However, out there in the world today, there is no one comprehensive strategy. You can say to a candidate, you have an interview coming up. Here is an approach you can take. So what I'm going to introduce you today is, this is an active interviewing approach. And active interviewing is a total strategy for preparing for an interview and then managing the interview. So what I'll be showing you today is a presentation format that you can bring into the interview. It's really the only thing that we can do with our candidates that goes through the interview door. So all of the practicing you can do and all the suggestions and all the practicing on questions, that kind of stops at the door. But here we're going to show you something that the candidate can actually bring with them to change the dynamics of the interview. So here's what I like to speak about today. So the first is interview hurdles. What creates hurdles? What trips up our candidates from really doing well and winning interviews? I like to talk about the problems with interviews, and interviews are broken. Research has shown that they're only about 52% successful in hiring a person who is going to be on the job 12 to 18 months after they're being hired. Now, that statistic is a little bit misleading because even though it's selecting people for 52% of the time that will be there 12 to 18 months out, they're not necessarily picking the top candidate. So hiring managers and employers are not getting the top candidate, and the top candidates aren't necessarily getting through to the job offer. And then I'm talking about let's fix interviews. Okay, so those are going to be the things we'll be focusing on. Okay, so another question. So what do you consider as a person coaching interviews, what do you believe to be the greatest hurdle in interviews? So if you can put that in the chat, or if you want to come off chat and talk about it. Okay, being confident, nerves, non-question to ask, right? Confidence is key, right? So how do we help people get confidence? Now there's interview fear, yes, but where does that fear come from? And that's a question I'm always asking my candidates. It's like the first thing I say is, how do you feel about this interview? They say anxious. I say, well, what are you scared of? And then we can start to analyze the fear. But there's a lot of fear in interviews. Not knowing how to sell themselves, Greg, that's great. That's what it's all about and what I'm going to talk about. It's a sales process. An interview is a sales call, and you're selling your services to a customer, right? So yeah, that's a big deal. Feeling scared they won't be successful, right? So it's not getting the job, it's failing, being judged. Oftentimes, we'll have our candidates that they have one egg in the basket, right? They haven't had an interview for a while. Now they have an interview, and that interview has so much pressure put on it. I often tell candidates that the best thing you can do for an interview is to have another interview with another company, because what that does is it reduces that pressure, and it makes it a lot easier to be clear in the interview. Okay, so those are some of the hurdles. When I work with candidates, a lot of the focus is on questions. How do I answer the questions in the interview? And what if I don't know the answer to questions? And that seems to be the focus and where a lot of the fear is. And that seems to be their greatest hurdle. So let's now talk about interviews, because interviews are broken. So a bad interview. Whose fault is a bad interview? And as we know, so many interviews go bad for one reason or another. But whose fault is it? So hiring managers hate interviews, and they're typically bad at them. And they're bad at them for a number of reasons. But a lot of hiring managers think that they can select people based on intuition or subjectivity, kind of this gut feel. But what they're not aware of is that they have a huge number of biases that they're operating under, and those biases are often unconscious biases. Now, some of them are conscious. I have a son who was a college athlete, and his bias is he's going to hire any college athlete that comes through, because he was a college athlete and he could manage both athletics and his grade, his school and his classes. He thinks that's tremendous. So he has a bias towards student athletes. Unfortunately, a lot of the biases that people have are against people. So, and again, it's unconscious. So hiring managers, and the other reason that hiring managers tend to hate interviews is it is a high risk activity. If you hire someone and they don't work out, I mean, there's all sorts of statistics about how it's anywhere from 2 times a person's salary to up to 40 times a person's salary, depending on the level that you're hiring at. So not only is it an expensive proposition to hire the wrong person, but then it also hurts morale, and you got to go back and go through the whole selection process again. So it's a very high risk activity that they're doing. Interviewers are poorly trained. Right? So oftentimes, even if a company offers training to interviewers and to hiring managers, they may not hire for a year. I mean, there's relatively few hiring managers are hiring constantly. So a lot of hiring managers go through training, and then 6 months or a year later, they have to hire someone, and all that training has been forgotten. And interviews are all talk. The problem with talking in an interview is that we're not all auditory learners. In fact, most of us are visual learners, or we're kinesthetic learners. So we learn and we retain information by seeing things. But job interviews are two people talking to each other. And typically, when a person's listening, they're only hearing 50% of what's being said, and they pay attention to 50% of the things that they're interested in. So this talking in an interview is not an efficient method for either the candidate to communicate information to the interviewer, or for the interviewer hiring manager to make a good, well-informed decision about who to hire. So candidates hate interviews, and they're bad at it. So typically, when I work with somebody and they apply for a job and they get an interview, the reaction is, woohoo, I got an interview. And then the next second is, oh no, I have an interview. Right? So that's the steps they go through. So the people, there's all sorts of things about interviews that candidates don't like. I mean, you're being in a situation where you're being judged. You're looking, you're looking to get given a grant of this job, and you may or may not get it. There's a power inequality or a perceived power inequality. So it's just an overall difficult situation. And there are some mistakes that candidates make. And I have to be honest about this, is that I think that the coaching profession, the career management coaching profession really promulgates this, is that focusing in on interview questions and answering those questions. And one of the ways we do that is that we have all these books out there. And you can go to, there's dozens of books about how to answer the 100, 200, 300, 500 most challenging interview questions. And if you Google interviewing, you typically get a lot of these books and this information about job questions. The reality is that there's thousands of different questions out there. And they go all the way from sensical questions to like nonsensical questions. If you were to be a tree, what tree would you be? So we really can't train or coach our candidates to answer all possible questions. Now, there are some basic questions, obviously, why are you interested in this job? And, tell me about yourself, and strengths and weaknesses. There's sort of common questions we can help them with, but there's no way we can help them with all the possible variation of questions that come into interviews. The other problem is candidates don't break out. They don't differentiate themselves. So if a manager is interviewing 10 or 12 or 15 people, candidates don't really know how to differentiate and stand out from others, and how to talk about their value adds, so they're a clear choice, broken out from other candidates. So often at the end of the selection process, it comes down to 2 or 3 candidates that are possible, but they haven't really differentiated themselves, so they're a clear standout. And how do career coaches feel about interviews? So how do we feel about it? So again, I would be interested in what what is your kind of reaction or feeling about how interviews are, and how you coach for interviews, and how you train people, and how people perform in interviews? I'd be interested in what your thoughts are.
I like doing interviews, but I think maybe because I feel confident doing them, because I know how, and I'm a vocal, I'm like communicating through orally. So
Greg, you yourself be a candidate in interviewing, right?
and just coaching people. Like, I enjoy, it's a part of my job I like doing is the mock interviews and teaching interviewing, because I think I feel confident in it.
Well, great. So you feel really positive about them. Certainly, look, interviews overall, it's very exciting for one of my candidates to get an interview. I'm all about that. It's very exciting. But there's mixed feelings about it, because I'm concerned about preparing people, and if they're going to go in adequately prepared, and if they're going to be able to take the training that I offer and support and actually use it. So it's like, how do I get my candidates to take the things, the strategies, the approaches, the questions, the information, and actually get it into the interview. When I first started this, and why I really started writing about job interviews, is I would work with candidates and train them for interviews, and sophisticated stuff like videotaping them and playing it back and analyzing the videotapes. But then what I found was they would go into the interview and I would say, how did it go? And they would say one of two things often. It was, the interview was terrible. They didn't let me talk about myself. All they did was talk about themselves and talk about the job. And I would say, well, why did you let them do that? Well, they would say, what am I supposed to do about that? They're the interviewer, I'm there, they're leading the interview. I'm supposed to be there to answer questions. So that was one response. The other response I would get from the candidates are, I got to the interview, I was so nervous, I was so scared, all the training just skipped out of my head. And we know that when people, human beings, are nervous or fearful, their thinking collapses. So, someone earlier on in the chat mentioned confidence. Well, confidence is all about remaining calm in interviews. Right? Because the calmer you are, the more you have access to memory and to flexibility and to creativity. When you're in a situation, this is any situation where you're feeling fear, all that thinking collapses. Okay. So in interviews also, I'm saying that EG said, interviews opportunity for the candidate to find out about a company, about the position. They might discover during the interview the position simply is not right for them. It's a two-way street. So if we have time, I really want to talk about this specific issue, and I will, when we talk about what is an interview used for. And I'm going to come back to that because I think I have somewhat of a different perspective on this, and it's a little bit controversial, so I would be interested to hear people's perspective on it, but I'll come back to that. Okay, so fixing the interview is it's a do-it-yourself project. So in this active interviewing approach, it really is incumbent on the candidate to take more control and to influence the interview and to fix the interview for themselves. So how do they do this? So in this active interviewing model, people are branding themselves and they're selling themselves in interviews, and they're presenting themselves to communicate to the hiring manager, to the interviewer, the information they want the hiring manager to know proactively. So let's talk about how people go about doing this. So the basic paradigm for active interviewing is it's a sales call. Now, this isn't an original thought of mine. It's really, I think, clear, and many coaches do believe that an interview is a sales call. So we have a candidate that's there selling their services to a potential client. And one of the nice things about seeing an interview as a sales call is that there is just a huge amount of sales strategies that we can use in a interview process to make to be more persuasive and to communicate benefits and to really take the interviewer through a sales process, hopefully, and at the end, getting the sale. So as is a sales process, so here's the interviewing process broken down into pieces. So the first thing a candidate would like to know is, why me? Right? So it's the same question. I often use the analogy of going to buy a car, and you walk into a car dealership. The first thing a good salesperson will ask you is, what brings you into this dealership? What brings you into a Volvo dealership or an Audi dealership or a Ford dealership? And what they're looking for is, what is the interest and what attracts the person to that specific type of car in that dealership. In an interview, you can use the same approach. So one of the things I suggest to my candidates is at the beginning of the interview saying, I am really excited about being here, and I'm looking forward to having you get to know me. Although I am curious about what led you to decide to interview me. That's a really killer question in that it does two things. One is it clues the candidate into what it is that the interviewer likes about them. And oftentimes it could be a small piece of what the candidate has done, but it's a large interest for the interviewer. So, I chose to interview you because you seem to have a very extensive background in SQL. Okay, I've done some SQL. I didn't know that was a big deal, but now that I know that, I'll certainly address that throughout the interview. Having had experience in SQL, I did this. In my prior job, I used SQL for this. So you can keep on going back and hitting on that why me question. The other thing is this is called what I call a mind hack. So what you do is you set up a confirmation bias in the mind of the interviewer. So you get the interviewer to talk positively about you, about the candidate. And then since you set that positivity up and that bias, the interviewers will look for things that support the reason they gave you for liking you as a candidate. So that's the first question, why me? The second question really has to do with due diligence and a needs analysis. So you come in to buy a car from me, what are you looking for? Are you you have a family and you want a van, or are you more concerned about finances and you want great mileage? Are you looking for a high performance car? I mean, what is it you're looking for? The same thing in a job interview. The first thing you want to know is, what is this job? What are the job requirements and the critical job requirements from the perspective of the interviewer? Understanding that each interviewer that you interview with will have a slightly different understanding of the job, a slightly different focus on the job. And a lot of the questions that people suggest, that coaches suggest you ask in the interview to figure out whether you want the job or not should be asked at the beginning of the interview, right? So if I'm interested in, what I'm trying to decide if this job is for me, what is the culture of the company? Or what is the leadership style of the manager I'll be reporting to? Or what are the success metrics? All those are good questions, but they're only good at the beginning of the interview because I can then use that information that I learned to focus my answers throughout the interview. Right. So for example, one of the questions, what are the greatest challenges that a person would face in this job? Well, if I ask that at the end of the interview and you tell me the challenges in the job, I don't have time to talk about those things and how my background and skills will really help with those challenges. So again, there was a question earlier on about, questions, whether should be deciding, using the interview to decide if you want the job. My perspective, and again, later on, I'll be looking for some thoughts about this, is I think you should use an interview to do one thing: sell yourself, sell yourself, sell yourself. Once you get the job offer, then you can start to go back and do your due diligence and do deeper dives on, is this a good fit for me? So that's the next step. The next step is matching your features to their needs. Right? So what you had is a conversation about what are the critical requirements of the job, what are you looking for, what are some of the challenges, how do you measure success on the job, what's the team like, is this a new job, or all those questions about the job. Then once you understand the job, you want to start to say, you're looking for this, I have this. So here's the requirements, here's how I match your requirements. The next is your value adds. So we talked earlier about the differentiating oneself in an interview. Candidates need to present to the hiring manager, you're hiring me and I meet the basic critical requirements of this job, but here's the value adds. Here's what else I can bring that differentiates me from other candidates. And again, when I get to the presentation part of this, I'll show you how all this works and how you can add those value adds in. Success stories. You know, we all talk about STAR or SOAR or SAR, all those stories. You want to be able to introduce those stories, and you don't want to wait for the right questions to come up. So you want to be able to talk about this, and certainly part of the preparation for the interview and part of the active interviewing preparation is putting together success stories, and those success stories are tied to the requirements of the job. The next is personal success factors. Now, another word for personal success factors is soft skills. So what you want to be able to do, and this is very difficult in an interview, is to bring out those soft skills that you have that make you successful on the job. So interviews are mostly focused on hard skills, but what do I do in soft skills, in communication skills, and listening, and establishing relationships, all those types of soft skills? How do I introduce that to the interviewer in the process? The next is an implementation plan. Again, lots of people don't think about this, but you know, I know that if you hire me, I need to start adding value to the job quickly. Here's my plan to do that. Here's my plan for the first 30 days. Here's my plan for the first 60 days. So, you know, it's like a small business plan, and it's really a very powerful message, because the message is, I'm going to hit the ground running. I have some ideas about how I can contribute value quickly. The next is stating your benefits. One of the mistakes that candidates make in interviews is they talk about their features, their features, their features. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. I have this experience. I can do this software. I can do this leadership. I can do this kind of management. But then they don't take the extra step and say, and here's the benefit to you. Because candidates assume if I tell you I have 5 years experience selling in this territory, oh, I know that if I tell you I have 5 years experience, you're just going to know that that's really a good thing for you and it's beneficial. And they stop short of saying, I have 5 years of selling in this territory, and the benefit to you is this. You know, I have established relationships. I have a shallow learning curve. I know, you know, the sales strategies and techniques for this type of, you know, work. And so you need to add those benefits, because good salespeople sell on mostly benefits, and then they support those benefits with features. And then the last question is any final questions and any objections that you might have to hiring me or moving me on to the next part of the interview process. So these are the 9 steps of the active interviewing process. And now what I'd like to do is show you a method for you bringing all of these into the interview and doing it really effectively. And the first thing I want to mention before I get into the presentation itself is that presenting visually is the key, right? Because visual communication is a lot more beneficial in that it has the retention goes up, and then with retention, the persuasiveness of what you talk about goes up, and the learning goes up, and the time to communicate goes down. So it's important to break away from, excuse me, this only talking to one another in interviews, and you need to make it visual as well. Okay, so here's how you can start to do this. And what I'm showing you now, and Greg, I'm not sure, but I also included a couple of samples of job interview presentations. I don't know if you shared that with them as well in the Google.
Don't think I did.
You know, okay, so
I apologize.
That's okay. So if you have it, this will be an example, and I included a couple examples. And of course, in the book itself, there's a number of examples of interview presentations. And in fact, in the book, I have 3 levels. I have an introduction presentation, a mid-level presentation, and a senior level presentation. Now, the presentation I'm showing you today would qualify mostly as a kind of intermediate level presentation, mid-level presentation. And also let me say that the coaching manual that I shared with you, that will pertain to this specific presentation. So it goes through and coaches and tells you how to introduce each of the pages and coaching strategies and tips. So here is the cover of the presentation. There's kind of a tagline across the top. This person was going for an HR position. So we have the name of the person, Linda Fields, and they have 4 personal brand terms. So what each candidate does is they choose terms that represent their brand, and they want to communicate that brand to the hiring manager. And by having it here, the hiring manager sees it. And a really great outcome is at the end of the interview process, or the end of the interview, and the candidate leaves, and the one interviewer turns to the other and says, what do you think about that person? Well, I think she had great leadership skills, a lot of integrity. Her team building was excellent, and she really had good strategic vision. That means that they have communicated their brand. So that's the cover. The next page is, this is the critical job requirements. And the way that this page is introduced is, I'm really interested in the job, and here's what I believe to be the critical job requirements. And I would like to speak with you about those requirements and make sure that I understand what it is that you're looking for. The number one reason that people don't work out in jobs is that they take a position where they simply don't have the skill set. The number 2 reason they often don't work out in jobs is they take a position, and the position, once they get there, is different than what they thought it was going to be. This helps with that process. So this goes through and says, okay, let me be clear about what you're looking for, right? So for example, this one, communicate verbally and in writing with all levels of internal, external customers. Tell me more about the types of communication that goes out. Who are the internal partners? Who are the external partners? What are you communicating to them? How often do you do it? What's the process for editing? What's the process for dissemination? So you can ask a lot of questions to understand what this job requirement really means. Once you have an idea of those, then you proceed to the next page, which is, here's how I match up with those critical requirements. You're looking for someone with a bachelor's degree. I have these things and this additional training. You're looking for 10 or more years of HR experience. Here's what I have. Now, the other thing is that this is a great place to also introduce your success stories, or your SOAR or STAR stories. So you can say, I have 14 years experience in implementing effective training programs. Let me give you an example of a training program I've implemented. Here was the situation. Here was the obstacles I had overcome. Here's the actions I took. And here was the results. So here is another good way to bring in coming into the interview. Again, another couple pages of matching up. Here's what you're looking for. Here's how I match those. And again, bringing in examples and stories as much as possible. Then the next page is additional areas of expertise. This is where a person gets to differentiate themselves. Now, what you see here are not the basic requirements of the job, but it's the value add that this person can bring to the job. So for example, part of the job requirement was not senior level recruitment, but this person can do that. A basic requirement of the job was not labor budgeting, but they can do that. So oftentimes as candidates talk about these additional areas of expertise, it really strikes home. I had one situation where I had a candidate that was going for a job managing a manufacturing facility. And they were just looking for a person to manage it. But in this additional areas of expertise, he put in that he could read blueprints, and he's worked with construction contractors to build new facilities. And in the interview, they said, oh, this is really great because we're not building today, but within the next 3 to 5 years, we think we're going to have to add on to the plant. And you would be a great candidate because you have this knowledge to do that.
Oh shit.
So this
Sorry.
is where, again, where you don't want in this section to say, the basic, I know how to do, HR paperwork. It's these additional areas of expertise that differentiate. Now, the next page in the presentation is outstanding career accomplishments. And here are a list of accomplishments: design of a relocation program, selecting outstanding HR representative of the year. And again, each of these has a story behind it. Either, again, the SAR or the SAR, or however, whatever acronym you want to use. And this is a way that a hiring manager can really hear in detail about some accomplishments that the candidate wants to share and the candidate thinks really represents. Now, the next one is the personal traits that help me succeed on the job. So here is a list of traits that a candidate selects that they think best represent them and why they are good at what they do. It's the soft skills. And then, of course, each of these soft skills is connected to a story. So, I bring out the best in people. Let me give you an example of how I do that. I'm collaborative problem solving. Let me give you an example of how I do that. So this gives a hiring manager, the interviewer, a really good view of the person's not just hard skills, but what they do and what their approach is, and whether what they're saying fits with the culture of the company. The next page is a 30 and 60-day strategic action plan. Now, sometimes people make this 60 days and 90 days, or 60 days and 100 days. So these are not time set. These times are not set. But what this communicates is I've really thought about the job. I understand the job to a degree, and here's what I think are realistic goals. Now, the way this is presented in the interview itself is, certainly when I get on the job and I'm talking to my manager, I will be developing more specific goals and goals more tied to the job. However, at this point, I think these are realistic goals. So I see there's a question about risk of presenting overqualified, outshining the person who will be their new boss. Well, that may happen and may be true. We may have bosses, and there are bosses out there that feel like they're would be challenged. But regardless, you can't control that as a candidate. All you can do is do the best interview process you possibly can and hope that the person that you're interviewing with will be good enough to know that they want to hire someone that is going to even outshine them, because it's going to help their job. Okay, so how do you match limited work experience for an entry-level position? Again, a lot of this is when it's entry level, it's like, listening 90% of the time, talking 10% of the time, learning basic HR requirements, learning team tasks. It really gets very more basic. And if Greg has a chance, again, I did share an entry level position presentation, and you'll see that these things get much more basic. And if you also look at a senior level CEO, it gets a lot more complex about determining strategy and stock prices. And I mean, so this really can go up and down. And entry level, a lot of it comes out of high school or college, and those skills and those things. And if you think about the jobs, excuse me, if you have a knowledge of the job, or you've actually done the job or similar job previously, you know this stuff. Like, this person has a background in HR. She definitely has a really good feel for what can be accomplished in 30 days and what can be accomplished in 60 days. The next is kind of a sales summary. I have all the pieces. And what you want to do is go through and highlight what you believe to be your main selling points. And this gives you the opportunity to talk about the benefits. So 14 years experience in HR, and the benefit to you is this. Okay, so Greg asks, I agree with you, saying how can this be seen as not hijacking the interview? So here's how this goes, and that's the number one question is don't hiring managers hate giving up control, right? Number one, hiring managers love giving up control because what you're basically saying to them is, you sit back, I'm going to provide you the information that you need to know to make a good hiring decision. So taking a lot of pressure off of the hiring manager. The other answer to this question, really the number one answer, is how you present this. So the way to present this whole idea is at the beginning of the interview to say to the interviewer, I'm really, really interested and motivated for this job. I've put together a presentation about my background, skills, and experience, and how I think they match the job and why I think I'm an excellent candidate. If we have time in the interview, I'd love to share that with you. Now, I can tell you that like 90% of the time, the interviewer is intrigued and say, oh yeah, okay, let me see it. And at some point along the interview, they ask to look at it. So in that way, the interviewer is inviting you to use the presentation. The other thing is if the interview itself, the format, or the interviewer decides that they don't want to see the presentation or have the candidate talk about it, it makes an excellent leave behind. So you can share it with the hiring manager. And at the end of the day, they have a stack of resumes and the presentation. Okay. Then the last section is questions to ask. And the idea here is to ask smart questions. Smart questions show that you have knowledge of the industry, the company, or the job. It's not a time to start asking questions to see if you would take the job if it were offered to you. It's a time to start asking questions and trying to create a conversation. So for example, given the recent deregulation, where do you see the market moving? Well, that's a smart question because it shows that you're familiar with the recent deregulation and you know that it's going to impact the market, and where's the market moving as a result of that. Next one also, how is RCO managing the shortage of H-1B visas? Again, you show that you're smart enough to know that there's this issue with visas, and RCO is a company that uses this H-1B visas, and how are they handling that whole thing? A great outcome of these questions is creating a conversation and having them a back and forth about, okay, how would we go about managing the shortage of visas? Well, now the candidate's actually almost like a consultant talking about solving this problem. It's a great place to be. And then the other question, which I suggest every candidate asks in every single interview, is based on my background experience, what do you think would be the greatest challenges for me in this position? Now, again, interview is a sales call. And in a sales call, any salesperson wants to know, are there any objections? Is there any reason why you wouldn't buy this car today? Is there any reason why you wouldn't put a down payment on this house? Is there any reason why you wouldn't buy this refrigerator? Those are all objection questions that the salesperson wants to know so they can work past the objection. In an interview, sometimes it's suggested to say, do you see me on your team? Or am I going on to the next round of the interviews? I think those questions are a little bit too direct, and oftentimes a hiring manager, the interviewer, will duck the candidate by saying, oh, you're great, but we're interviewing a number of other people, so I really can't tell you whether you're moving on or a member of the team. Asking this question about what do you think my greatest challenges would be gives the candidate the opportunity to address any challenges. So typically what happens is there's a kind of couple of different responses. One is sometimes a hiring manager will raise a challenge that is so significant that the candidate kind of knows, well, I'm not going to really get this job because there's this huge challenge that I really can't do anything about, and it's just not a good fit. So, but at least in the interview, you don't go home and wait for the next couple of weeks worrying about whether you're going to get called or not. Second thing oftentimes is that there is a conception. Well, we think that your greatest challenge is you don't have international experience. Well, wait a second, I do have international experience. It just hasn't come up. Let me fill you in on it. I had one candidate who's going for a CFO position, and he was really very proud of the fact that he was good with implementing software accounting systems. So in the interview, he talked about that and he brought it out as a real strength. He asked this question at the end of the interview: what do you think my greatest challenge would be? And the CEO said to him, well, you're going to want to just implement a accounting system, and they're expensive and they're big, and we don't know if we can afford it. And, I don't know if that's really what we're looking for. And then this candidate was able to say, well, wait a second, no, I'm not just going to go implement the accounting system. I would do a lot of research and due diligence to decide if an accounting system would actually improve things and what the cost would be. So instead of him walking out of the door, the candidate walking out of the door, and the CEO saying, hey, we can't hire this guy, he's just going to spend all our money on this accounting system, by asking this question, he was able to go back and to address that challenge. And then, of course, there are times there's challenges that you just have to figure out how to work around. Well, your greatest challenge is, you don't have a lot of experience with PowerPoint. Well, you're right, I don't. But in my last position, I didn't have a lot of experience with Excel. So let me tell you about how I went about learning how to use Excel. I did this training. Within a month, I was using Excel. I would say within 6 months, I was an expert Excel user. I would go and learn PowerPoint in the same way. So it's a really important question, and it really saves interviews. Now, there was a question about bringing up negative thoughts about you. Why not hire you? Again, it's there. You just don't get a chance to talk about it if you don't raise the question about the challenges. Because when the candidate leaves the room, either the hiring manager is saying to themselves, or if there's they're talking to others, here's why we can't hire this person because of this challenge. At least this gives you the opportunity to address it. And I can tell you, a lot of candidates have really saved the interviews by being able to correct things. And then the last question: how and when should I follow up with you? So much of job search is spent after interviews sitting around thinking, well, I haven't heard from them. It's a week, it's 2 weeks. Should I contact them? Should I email them? Should I call them? What's going on? Should I, am I out of the running? Have they given the job to somebody? It's all that spinning that goes on. So what I suggest, and with this question being on the presentation, it's like, how and when should I follow up with you? So and to be specific about this, again, another sales strategy. So if the hiring manager says something like, well, we're going to be interviewing through next week, we should be able to get back to you like maybe a week from Monday. The response to that is, great. If I don't hear from you on Tuesday, would it be okay if I give you a call on Tuesday? So what that does is it sets up the next appointment and the next contact. So the candidate knows that if they're sitting at home and they haven't heard anything, week from Monday, on Tuesday, they call or they email. Now, are they definitely going to get a response to the hiring manager? No, but at least they have a time frame, and there's some obligation on the hiring manager's part, because they said, yeah, call me a week from Tuesday. So that's a great question, and it avoids a lot of spinning at the end. So this is kind of the end of the presentation. So I want to stop here and see if people have any questions about the presentation and any thoughts about it.
Eric, I saw someone said, would you share the PowerPoint with us?
I can share the PowerPoint with you. Yes, absolutely. I can share it with Greg. Any other questions or thoughts, reactions to this strategy?
I really like that first one, that why me. I think that's a great kind of confidence boost for the interviewer, or the interviewee. And then they, like you said, it gives them all day during the whole interview. They can then come back to the strong points.
Yeah, and the other, right, and the other thing about this presentation is that there's often people kind of get certain questions about how it would work in the interview itself. I can tell you, having worked with literally thousands of people, it works great. And it's just such a new, innovative, different approach that hiring managers really are intrigued by it and like it, and they get a lot of good information. However, even if it doesn't get into the interview, if a candidate chooses not to use it for whatever the reason is, going through and preparing this makes them think through, what are the critical job requirements? How do I match those requirements? What are value adds I bring? So it puts them through an active interviewing preparation process that then they have it, even if they don't bring the written, the visual presentation itself.
Yeah, this is just a whole new way to look at interviewing, Eric, which is why I'm so excited you came on today. We all kind of have maybe our curriculum or however we do it, and then you just came in and blew it up. I'm like, I never thought of it that way, and I'm to readdress how I teach others about it.
And what you'll find, when you get a hold of the manual will go through in great detail and show you, talk to you about each individual page, how to present the page, tips on the page, how to help the candidates prepare each of the pages of the presentation. We're talking about confidence. When people go in with this presentation, they also feel a whole lot more confidence. It's a challenging time when you have a panel interview and everyone has a question to ask. Panel interviews are difficult, but this works for a panel interview as well, because you can share this with each of the people in the panel. And again, one of the problems in interviewing is if you have information you want to impart, if you have to wait for the right question, or if you have to wait for the interviewer to be good at what they're doing to get that information out, it's kind of a passive stance as opposed to being an active salesperson. And a salesperson doesn't necessarily control a sales interaction. They're guiding it, which is really what you want to do with this presentation and interviews, is you want to guide the interview and get the information to the hiring manager that you want them to hear without waiting for a question. Now, I have a couple of other hints and tips that I have. If we have a little bit of time, let me say some things that I think is really important. So in interviews, you need to talk about the elephants in the room. And again, I find that candidates don't do this. They think, well, if I have a number of short-term jobs in my resume, or if I have gaps in my resume, or if I obviously don't match the job in a certain way, if we don't talk about it, it's going to get forgotten or overlooked. But my suggestion is always for the candidate to decide, what are the elephants? And let's proactively bring those out. So I had a candidate that had a number of short-term jobs on his resume, and they were for all sorts of different reasons: relocation, there was an illness, a variety of things, and he wouldn't talk about it. And so we discussed it, and what we did is have him develop a strategy that at the end of the interview, he would say, I just want to point out that on my resume, I have a number of short-term positions. I like to tell you about those and how they came about. And that really helped to clear out those questions, and he started to get some job offers. And then the other thing that I oftentimes suggest to people is coming up with a phrase. I'm blocking the phrase now. The president last night in his presentation, let's get it done, or let's complete this. That was his phrase. He repeated, let's get this done, let's complete this. So if a candidate can come up with a phrase, so this first phrase was a person who was an admin, and she would repeat this: I manage my boss's office efficiently. And she say that a number of times throughout. Why would you hire me? Well, I manage my boss's office efficiently. And let me tell you how I do that. All my bosses have found that I manage their offices efficiently. Let me tell you more about that. I'm the go-to guy for financial management. This was a person who's going for a accounting job. I'm the go-to guy for financial management. One of the things that people have found in other companies, I'm the go-to guy for financial management. I create clarity from chaos. This was a web designer. So people have, developed these, and they say something, they say it often enough, it becomes the truth. thoughts on behavioral interviewing and its incorporation to the process. Behavioral interviewing is a little bit tough with a format. If you run into a behavioral interview format that all they're doing is behavioral interviewing, you may not be able to introduce this into that behavioral interview format. However, you have previously to the interview, you've prepared your stories, your success stories, your accomplishment stories, and you've tied those accomplishment stories to the job requirements. So you're pretty much prepared to talk about stories based on questions you will probably get asked. And then, of course, the other thing is you can always use it as a leave behind. If there's any questions, I'm willing to hang out for a while after the presentation is over. I know that Greg wants to end this at 12 so that people can get to lunch. So thank you for having me and thank you for listening. I really appreciate it.
Anyone have questions for Eric? Eric, was you have a book for where can we find it? Amazon?
It's on Amazon, sure. If you just go to Amazon. Now, someone the other day, it's an audio book as well. I would suggest not going for the audio book because the audio book doesn't have the written content at the end, the forms that you could use in the libraries. So in the book, there's actually suggestions for things like the soft skills, the personal success factors. So there's all these expert libraries you can draw information from.
Awesome. Check out Eric on LinkedIn. You can find access to his website there. Eric, I want to thank you so much for presenting today. We all loved it. I know Jackie Kennedy Harris is here with CPA. She shared, we have a survey form, or you'll get one shortly. We'd love you to fill it out afterwards. Get feedback. If you'd love to present on behalf of a CPA, please reach out. We would love to have you. That's one of the questions on the survey. If you loved today, join us next month. We're going to do this again March 22nd. Carrie Aver, she's going to present on using self-coaching to manage your mindset. I've heard she's presented at the state conference before. She's amazing. She's a CPA member. So I look forward to seeing all of you next month. Hopefully I'll see some of you at the state conference March 1st. Before then, I shared information there. calplacement.org is our website. You can find information on becoming a member or about the state conference. We'd love to see you down in Palm Springs. With that, have a great rest of the week, everyone. Feel free to stay on if you have questions for Eric. So yeah, it was great seeing all of you here participating.
Hi, my name is Luis Sobrevilla, and I work with the Merced County Office of Education, and I'm a proud member of California Placement Association.
Hi, my name is Greg Friedman. I work with Merced County Office of Education. I'm a proud member of the CPA Northern Region.
Hi, my name's Denise Crawford, and I work at Bakersfield College, and I'm a proud member of the California Placement Association Central Region.
Hi, I'm Rosalinda Rivas, and I'm a proud member of the California Placement Association.